Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am, as you can see, in the virtual Grays of Westminster secondhand department today, streaming live from my office for obvious social distancing reasons. We cannot all be in the shop at the same time, so I've had to stagger my days a little bit, and so today I am doing an at-home stream, although to be honest, it's probably just as well, because most of the content is stuff that I want to show you from my computer rather than trying to do something while I'm standing in the middle of the shop. Now, I wanted to use my fancy setup with my Z6, but unfortunately my computer is too old to cope with a capture card. For those people who were curious as to Tuesday's stream, essentially to use a digital camera like a Nikon mirrorless, the Z cameras are super for this, but you can use other cameras as long as you can turn that auto standby mode off. You can pretty much use any camera, but you need a capture card, and the capture card requires certain hardware, let's say, which I don't have at home. So I brought it all home. Doesn't work, never mind. So we're just going to stick with the old webcam, which means undoubtedly I'm going to have people tell me that I'm too shiny, I'm not in focus, and a bunch of other stuff. I'm sorry, I have all the gear, I just don't have the right computer. Anyway, yeah, it is pretty grey, I think, worldwide today, by the looks of things. And hello to everyone who has joined so far. Today we are talking about portraiture lighting, mainly. The reason being that a lot of people kind of put portraits together, they don't necessarily know the methodology behind what they're doing, and sometimes it's quite good to break down a picture and analyze how the lighting was done so that you can recreate it. And also, like I said with the composition stream that I did a while back, if you know the rules, then you can break them. So that's what we're going to do today. So I have a few photos of yours, which I have taken from the drive, which are perfect examples. I've got a few of my own in there as well. And Simon Stafford very kindly sent me some pictures. This was originally going to be a stream about black and white photo noir photography. I wanted to particularly concentrate on low-key portraits, but once I kind of started down the route of looking at black and white portraits and how these photo noir mock-ups were done, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, to be honest, and then I ended up with these kind of, I said 7, and there's probably more in there, but about 7 different key and guiding principles that you could use to mock them up. So you can certainly use these principles for the black and white noir sort of setups, or you can also just apply them to general photography. A lot of what we're going to see this afternoon is black and white photography, not all of it, but a lot of it. Now, for those of you who aren't subscribed, that is awful. You should be a subscriber. I'm pretty sure everyone's a subscriber, but just in case, please do subscribe if you haven't already. We will be changing the schedule of our streams over the coming weeks, so best to be notified when we are streaming by hitting that little bell icon, and then you will know when I'm going live or when I'm uploading a video, because once we move back into the shop, I will also be doing the shorter videos again, because we'll have the setup to do that. Separately, if you want to contribute to the coffee fund, please do so. It is all welcome, and everyone in the shop greatly appreciates it. All right, so to start, the first 2 kind of types of lighting that I want to break us down into, one is front or flat lighting, and the other is side lighting, and they have lots of different subcategories. And as I said, you can make and break the rules as much as you like, but I just thought it would be easier to separate those 2 categories. So when it comes to flat lighting, that generally means you don't have much in the way of shadows. Everything is very flatly lit. You're usually getting the subject lit from behind the camera or in front of the subject, essentially, so you don't have much in the way of harsh shadows. The reason I kind of pulled those together is because they usually go hand in hand with one another. You don't always have to have flat lighting coming from the front. I've got an example of that, which I'll show you shortly. But more often than not, all of these things I'm also going to talk about don't have to be done with speed lights. You could use natural lighting. You can use reflectors. You can use constant lighting if you want to, like an LED panel, or if you're feeling particularly flush and you've got pro photo gear set up. Those are great. The constant light sources, the whatever they are now, don't remember what they're called, but you can use various different light sources. You don't have to use a speed light. For a lot of the stuff that I did, I used speed lights, but I will show you some natural lighting as well, although we've covered that quite extensively, I would say, for our for our streams. So just to show you what I mean by front and flat lighting, let me just make sure I've got the right set of shots up here. Here we go. Okay, so some of you are going to find these photos very familiar because they're yours. So look out for them. All right, so this is what I mean by front lighting. This is a shot by Baxter, who is a regular subscriber, let's say, a regular occurrer on our live stream, and he has taken some fantastic portraits. Please do go and look at the drive folder because they are superb, and I really struggled to pick just a handful to give you examples. So front lighting can be beautifully high key like this. Obviously there is also a backlight here, and then, as he's put in his description, thank you Baxter for being so thorough, a reflector to provide the fill light. But you would generally pretty much call this flat lighting because there aren't any heavy shadows. It's a very high key image, and high key is what we usually kind of think when we think flat lighting. If you don't know the difference between high key and low key, I did a stream on it last week, I think it was. So do have a little look at that. Now this is a low-key example. This is actually not flat lighting, but it is front lighting. The light source is entirely coming from the front. This is my very grisly looking husband who needs a haircut and a shave. He will feature quite heavily in today's stream, but this is just light coming from behind the photographer. You can tell also from where the catch light is, and where the shine is, and where the shadow is. I could have also done a backlight, but that's a different type of photography, which I will talk about later. This is another example of what I would call front lighting. It's actually, I'm assuming it's natural lighting. This is William Gracia's. This is a wonderful shot. Again, William has fantastic photographs and images in the drive folder, so please do check those out. But I picked this one just because to me it was the most obvious that it was broad daylight just from the shadow that got cast on the swimmer's arm there. But it's all front lighting. It's all the lights pouring in from the front there, so it doesn't just have to be black and white. This is an example by Lubomir. Again, flat lighting. Now I'm going to talk a little bit later about head tilts and angles and stuff like that, but this is very interesting because he's got the head tilt, but he's also got the flat front lighting there, so it goes straight onto the subject. And you don't just have to have the subject looking straight on to the screen, as can be seen in Steve Wasp's photo here. This I would consider flat lighting just because the only real shadow is coming from the gentleman's cap, but the light itself is not creating any shadows. But the gentleman is not looking head on to the camera, so despite the fact that he's not looking head on, you can see that the light source is straight onto his face. So you've got that kind of fairly flat. The only thing that's creating shadows are these marvelous sort of lines and wrinkles which actually create the whole atmospheric portrait. So that is flat or front lighting. Now there is a kind of sub branch of this which is called butterfly lighting. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you might also know it as paramount lighting. So in this sense, in this type of lighting, the subject is lit from above and behind the photographer, but you get this little shadow under the nose. I think Dan is the only example I have here of a butterfly. I took dozens of shots of him, but this was probably the best example of this little butterfly shape under the nose, hence it's called butterfly lighting. Now, just to show you on... Is this the one? Yes. So this is my very rough little diagram of how the lighting setup works for a butterfly lighting effect. And this is a term, butterfly or paramount lighting gets used a lot in technical articles, so it's worth knowing the words just so that you know what people are talking about when they talk about butterfly lighting. So in my case, I didn't use a reflector with that portrait of Dan, which would have been beneficial actually. The shadow under his nose would have been less harsh, but I kind of wanted to create this super grungy high contrast portrait. So the main light source is right behind the photographer. Photographer is here and subject is here. There's the background. And then this is just a side-on view. So again, you've got your potentially optional reflector, which the subject, you may want the subject to hold for you. Photographer, and then the light source is usually 2 to 3 feet above the subject. It varies a bit depending on how big you want that butterfly, how harsh you want that light, but it's quite a common way to create slightly more flattering shadows. Now, just to explain, different shadows work differently on different people's faces. So, for example, my face, because I've got very hereditary dark circles. Blame my lineage for that. Usually side lighting can be quite unflattering for me. So I generally have to have 2 light sources kind of front in order to handle any deep shadows and stuff like that. So different people's faces will benefit from different types of lighting. Butterfly lighting doesn't work for everyone, but it does work quite well if you've got someone with a very dainty nose. Again, so the light source for my streams, for example, is coming from right next to the camera, and you do, if I were a bit further away and the light were a bit higher, I would end up with that butterfly shape right there, which is what we mean by butterfly lighting. I don't know why it's called paramount lighting, actually, but I have heard it referred to as that a few times. Maybe something to do with mountains, I'm not sure. Anyway, so that is a branch of front lighting that you can use. Now, the other one, fairly obvious one, is kind of natural window light, but you can also use natural window light for split lighting, which is what I'm going to talk about next. But if you don't have flashes and you're kind of working with homemade reflectors and homemade light sources, then you're probably best off using a nice big window, having the subject, if you want to do front lighting and you want all that light falling onto the subject's face, just want to use a nice big window and then a reflector just to lift the shadows from underneath if you're not higher than the subject. Yes, Stephen, I'm back home. Just for today. So now, sorry, I'm just going to check if anyone had any. No, everybody's listening. That's fantastic. Yeah, my little diagrams had a pop of color in them, but not all of them. just whatever I thought of using at the time. All right, so that's flat and front lighting, butterfly, paramount lighting as in the Hollywood film studio. Okay, I thought it might have something to do with that, Simon, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to just guess, so thank you. That's fantastic. That makes a lot of sense. So now I want to talk about split lighting. Now there are many branches and types of split lighting, and again, different types work well for some people, not so well for other faces. I did a lot of pictures of my kids. Generally, children don't, I mean, my children certainly, because of their little round, small faces, those kind of harsh, dramatic lighting effects just don't really work for them. So they tend to work better with natural light or with slightly less sculpted light, so they don't look so scary. And if you look at, for example, if you do a little bit of research and you look at professional children photographers or portrait photographers who also photograph children and babies, generally speaking, the light is very soft, it's very gentle, and you don't find lots of harsh shadows. So for those kind of things, you would usually be using flat lighting or front lighting. If you are interested, have a little look at the ProPhoto website. They have quite a few tutorials on there. One of them was on the subject of beauty lighting. Beauty lighting, again, isn't really, it's a lighting of its own. It incorporates all these things I'm going to talk about today. But it's knowing what's going to work with the subject, with the colors that the subject is wearing, for example, and generally lighting quite evenly and flatteringly so you don't get those harsh shadows. We don't always want nice fluffy portraits though. Sometimes we want kind of edgy portraits. So that's why I'm going to talk about split lighting or side lighting. I mean, it's got few words. So let me just show you some examples of those once I find my slides. There we go. And also switch over to the screen view. That would help, wouldn't it? All right. So with your side lighting, so this, for example, this is Simon's diagram. His is much tidier than mine was. So much more tidier. So for example, in the picture here, this is side lighting, and this is also a profile shot, so this is slightly different, but the shadows are incredibly dramatic, and you know, the detail that you see, this was a kind of photo noir mock-up, so you just get a little edge of the ear here, you get a little bit of light falling onto the neck here, and then all of the light is coming straight onto the face, and this is the mock-up for that. So the camera is here, the subject is pointing that way, shoulders just a little bit to one side. The main light here with a softbox, because these lights can be very, very harsh, is pointing straight onto the subject's face. And then there was this little fill light, and as I pointed out, the fill light was set to -2 here, but it just picks up that little bit. And in fact, if you could see the back of the subject's head, which wasn't necessary for this portrait, but if you did, you would also be able to see the light falling onto there. So that is one example. This one is another one by Baxter. Baxter, I stole a lot of your photos today. So thank you for all of your creativity. They are amazing. So this is direct sunlight, a low-key portrait again. So the background is basically gone, but the one source of light is straight onto the side of the subject's face, and just picking up that illumination there. There's no kind of fill or reflector or anything. It's just straight on split lighting. This is another good example just because it's less dramatic, and you've just got the one window light coming in onto the subject's face. This also falls into another category that I will talk about in a moment, which could be referred to as loop lighting, or also could be referred to as short lighting, where basically the subject, the side that isn't illuminated, is facing towards the camera. And I might show that picture again just as an example when we come to that. Now, this is kind of what I mean by taking pictures of kiddos and using harsh lighting. So this, I've shown you this picture before. This is natural light coming from the window. There is a reflector on this side to pick up the shadows. And although it does have some shadows in it, it is a much less kind of harsh looking portrait than, for example, this one, which is lit by a speed light to one side. No fill, no reflector, nothing, and you get these very, very harsh shadows. Apart from the fact that my youngest does not like having his picture taken at all, and I was trying to go for some dramatic effect here. It just doesn't totally work for me as a lighting effect for lighting up pictures of the kids. So it's personal preference. You may quite like it, whereas in this example, very dramatic picture of my old man, and the light is coming from this side, and then there's absolutely nothing here to handle the shadows. There's no reflector, there's no fill light, nothing. It's just one key light straight onto the side, and it's pretty harshly onto the side, as you can see. Now, there is a branch of side or split lighting, which some of you might have heard of, named after this bloke. This is Rembrandt, for those of you who don't know. Rembrandt was very, very famous for painting portraits where you'd end up with this little triangle of light right here under the eye of the shadow side of the face. And here is just an example of one of his portraits where pretty much not all of the blokes, because some of them are not looking in that direction, but this little triangle here became his kind of signature portrait style. Now, the way that is done, and a lot of people talk about Rembrandt lighting, I'm trying to think, there is another, loop lighting is another type. It's slightly different, and I'll explain why. Rembrandt's specifically the triangle under the eye kind of effect. And if I can show you my diagram here. This is the Rembrandt lighting mock-up or setup that I use. So subject here, single light source to the side and slightly above. That's pretty much where it was. It might have actually been slightly in front just to catch that little triangle of light on the subject's face. But just to show you these examples. So here's one that Simon did, for example, with, which is very, very clever actually. So subject is here. The main light is coming from the side, and again it would usually be maybe head level or slightly above the subject. Then he used a black flag to prevent any spill of the light onto the background. That's for this shot. So you can see there we've got this little triangle here. And then a white reflector just to reduce the amount of fill light. So that is the setup for that one. If he hadn't used, for example, a reflector, then it might have been a slightly harder shadow on this side, might have looked a little bit more Rembrandt-esque, but you can kind of see what I mean by the little triangle that appears there. This is another kind of low-key example. This was actually a very, very small triangle of light here, but way more than on the straight-on side lighting, which I showed you a picture of earlier. Here is another one. This might be a slightly better example. So you kind of get a shadow from the nose that then creates this triangle of light there. And then just to show you that you can do it with natural light, this is without a flash. This is just a window light, and it's the position. I had to move this kid's head around. It's like, move your head so that I can get this little triangle of light. But I had to move it quite dramatically in order to get that little, just the positioning of the light right. But this was without flash. So you can create a natural Rembrandt effect if you've got a strong enough light source on one side, and if you angle the subject's head in the right angle. Now, so that's Rembrandt. As I say, named after the painter. If you want to Google paintings by Rembrandt, pretty much all of his self-portraits have that that little triangle light as well. This just happened to be a particularly good example, but also a lot of his paintings of other people employ that effect. And if any of you may not have done, but if any of you have looked at the New York Institute of Photography course, this is one of the lighting techniques that they refer to, this one and the butterfly, in their portraiture lighting module. So it's kind of generally taught as a lighting effect that everybody should know, and try at least once. I would say try it, give it a go at least once. Now, a derivative of Rembrandt lighting would be loop lighting, which I referred to briefly just a moment ago. I want to just point this one out again, because this could almost class as loop lighting. Loop lighting generally means that you get a little loop of shadow from the nose. It doesn't usually create a closed triangle, so that's possibly a kind of a hybrid effect. But let me just see, I have an example. Let me find, supplied by your good friend of the show, Lubomir. Here we go. This is a great example of loop lighting, because the light is coming from this side and it is creating that tiny little loop of shadow, but it's not creating a Rembrandt effect just because of the way that it's been lit. Lubomir, I'd be very interested to know how you created that, and whether or not you used just one light or a fill or a reflector. This one is by Brian. And now this is perhaps a less conventional example, because the light comes from this side and then he's also got a backlight. But for the sake of the picture and kind of conveying that it's on a stage, this spotlight really works for this. But it is also a loop light because of the position of where the flash is. This is, again, probably a slightly more subtle example. In fact, I have another shot of Nadia, which is possibly a little bit more, possibly a better demonstration of loop lighting. But essentially the light is coming from the side and it's creating this small shadow on the side of the nose. So that is worth knowing. It's all a matter of where you position the subject and the light as to whether or not you get Rembrandt or loop lighting or butterfly or anything like that. So you can have a little play with those examples. Now, the next thing that I want to show you is, let me just see here. The next one that I want to show you is broad lighting. There we go. Sorry, I had to read my notes. So the broad lighting is this one. Yes, thank you. So I've got so many examples open. I beg your pardon for taking a few minutes to deliberate there. Right. Broad lighting. Let me just switch over and explain what that means to you before I dive into showing you the pictures. So broad lighting and short lighting, terms that get bandied around quite a lot, is actually more to do with the position of the subject's face and where it is in the frame. So broad lighting usually means that the subject's face is turned towards the source of light, whereas short lighting usually means that the lit side, which I can't do because the light is right there, but I can't show you. Short lighting usually means that the subject's face is lit from the side that is away from the camera. Why are they called broad and short lighting? Well, as you can probably see with me looking at the screen here, if I turn my face towards the source of light, it actually makes my face look wider. Whereas if I had a light source here and this portion was in shadow, then my face would look narrower or shorter. So short lighting, the light's coming from the back; broad lighting, the light's coming onto the front. And it's just which way the subject is tilting their face. People who have very broad faces, you might find that tilting their face towards the light is not so flattering, whereas short lighting might work really, really well for them. And again, if you've got someone with a very narrow face, my husband, despite all the grizzle and the hair and the beard, has quite a narrow face. So for him, generally speaking, having the light coming from this side would make his face look super skinny, because then everything is in shadow. And it does, it gives him a very, very thin face profile. Very useful things to know if you ever want to do selfies. Well, where should the light come from? So with broad lighting, I only had 2 examples. Some of them kind of overlapped with some of the other things that I was showing you, but I had 2 examples that I just wanted to show you of the light coming straight onto the subject's face, and these are kind of 2 standalone examples. So this is again by Baxter. Now it's harder to see that this is broad lighting because of the props being used, but it is essentially because the subject's face is being lit more on that side. Now this is obviously natural lighting, and again would be considered broad because the subject's face, in this case Zach, is much broader than the shaded side, which is shorter. So it makes his face look a little bit bigger. Now, when it comes to short lighting, let me find it. This one. Here we go. So Simon sent me a great example of this, and this is the photo of this. So this would be considered short lighting because the light is coming from the back of the subject's face and the front is completely shaded. And here is the diagram to go with that. So you've got a main light coming straight onto the back of the subject's face, a little bit of fill coming from the side just to illuminate this area here. So you've got a little bit of ear and the back of the neck lit up, so that it's not just all black from here on out. Cameras here, and then a very dark background. Now, just to show you, as I was talking about my husband, his face always looks super skinny when we light him like this. So the light was coming from behind him, or not behind him, but kind of to the side and back a little bit. And he had his face tilted towards me, but then of course it meant that his face looked very, very skinny. He also looks very, very suspicious looking character. So those are broad and short lighting. Now, before I talk about the next thing, I want to just make sure that you're all tracking with me. So let me just find the comments quickly. Here we go. Oh, goodness me. People have been busy. Thank you. It is coffee time, Terry. And thank you, Brian. And thank you, Stephen. That is wonderful. I really, really appreciate it. All right, now I'm going to scroll back because I missed a few comments here, I'm sure. Why is child school portrait photographers use an umbrella? Simon was going to answer that. There we go. An umbrella can be used as either a reflective surface or a diffusing surface, but in both instances it produces a larger light source. So when we talk about, so if you look at this is a speed light. This is an SB900. The problem with speed lights is that the source of light is very, very small. So this outputs a tremendous amount of power for such a small little flash, but it does mean that you don't get very diffuse light. Even with the diffuser, I've talked about this a few times, you can use I use a Fong as a diffuser sometimes if I'm just using on-camera flash. in the case of most of my portrait setups that I did yesterday, because I don't have an SB5000 and neither of my cameras have a built-in flash that controls flashes, I either have to use a hot shoe to hot shoe cable, which is not very practical. If you are, I mean, it's fine if your flash is going to be here and your camera, excuse me, is going to be here. So if you've got the hot shoe to hot shoe cable, works at a distance of about 80 centimeters. But if you are trying to work with longer distances, which I was, then I actually had to have my SB900 on the camera, and then I had to have it dialed right down, and I had to have it on master mode and pointing backwards. And then I had to use my SB600 as a slave and have that mounted behind the subject or to the side or wherever my light mock-up was. So I don't have an umbrella, unfortunately, but I know a few of you do. One of the benefits of having an umbrella is just diffusing that tremendous amount of light that you get. And as Andy pointed out, the school portraits, and this takes me back because school portraits was always kind of a point of of worry for me as a kid. I hated getting my portraits taken, but they will always use the biggest light source that they can possibly get away with, obviously in their traveling studio. So the umbrella allows them to take something like a speed light, which obviously is very compact and will just fit in a camera bag, and then stick it in an umbrella to diffuse the light, rather than having massive studio lights that they're carting around with them everywhere. It's just a kind of practicality point. How do you persuade them to volunteer to have their pictures taken? My kids, with difficulty. Zach is my oldest, as you've seen, because he's featured heavily in a lot of my pictures, doesn't mind having his picture taken. He also really enjoys photography. Damon just doesn't like being in front of the camera, a bit like his mother, really. So I think they're just different personalities. But in terms of when I've gone and done events where there are kids or weddings where people want to have pictures of their kids, then usually you have to just really get into a little bit of a rapport with the kids. If they're kids that you don't know, it can be quite difficult. Bribes always work, as Fatini is saying. Yes, I make great cake. Sometimes it is a matter of like, okay, so Mummy's going to take some pictures of you now, and then we're going to bake some cookies. Then magically they will cooperate. It's not always the case, but it is sometimes. Sometimes it's like, okay, instead of doing chores, we're going to do photos today, and then they'll be happy to do that as well. But yeah, it's a willingness thing, and it can be quite tricky. As Ed says, size versus distance to the subject. So yes, when you're diffusing light, if your subject is closer to the light source, you have to diffuse more. The further away your subject is, the less you have to diffuse your light. Hopefully that makes sense. I didn't do any diagrams of that. How very unprepared of me. But essentially, the more diffusion you have, the softer the light will become. If you're not going for that, and obviously what we're talking today is more kind of dramatic lighting effects, rather than, let's say, just soft natural lighting effects. So in these cases, we've got the light fairly close to the subject and maybe not quite as diffused as if you're trying to do sort of natural lighting effects. Now, I want to show you some backlighting examples. Now, backlighting kind of falls into a few of the other categories depending on what you're doing with it. With a lot of Simon's examples, as you will have seen, there was maybe a light slightly behind and then a bit of fill. Some of the examples I'm going to show you of stuff that I've shot has been, again, there's been backlighting, but there's also been another light source there somewhere. It's entirely dependent upon what you want to create in your image. But backlighting can be very dramatic, and it can also be very effective. So I'm going to show you some examples of backlighting, all being well. Here we go. Yes. So here is one of Simon's setups of backlighting. This is a fantastic example because it is just one light source. If you have a little look here, you've got the single main light source on the subject, and then Particularly if you've got white walls or windows or anything like that, you might want to have something just to absorb any extra light so you don't end up with any kind of catch light or fill light. So the ear, the back of the head, everything has completely disappeared. It's fantastically atmospheric. This is more of an example using two lights. So as you can see, I've showed you this picture before, just because I happen to really like it. So backlight is actually creating this effect of the dust pouring off. This is not an edited photo at all. This is actually dust that was in the warehouse that we were shooting in. And then the main light source is actually coming in from the front, but the backlight produces this amazing kind of silhouette or outline of the subject. Now, a similar kind of, this was the same location, just a different model. This was backlit, but then I also used a flash over here just so that I could catch the ballerina's face, because I wanted some of this illuminated. Whereas if it had just been backlit on its own, she would have been in complete darkness, and then the only thing that would have been lit up is her outline, which was not the kind of shot that I was going for. This is an example I've showed you before. This is by John, our regular, and again I think I used this as a low-key example. This is obviously one light source just coming in and creating that lovely outline. So you can create some very powerful portraits with a single light behind the subject. As with all of these things, when looking at your settings, and here's a real kind of, I would say, a key thing to bear in mind. When you take your kind of first prep shot, or when you're getting ready to take your shots with flash or with artificial lighting, you kind of have to ask yourself first, do I want the flash to entirely affect my subject, or do I just want it to help the subject along? And I mentioned this the other day for some other reason. I can't remember, sometimes I repeat myself. But if you do want the flash to be the only source of light and the only thing that is affecting the subject, then the first thing to do before you turn the flashes on, before you hook it up, when it comes to your settings, is just to take a shot and make sure that it's black. So that might mean, let's say you want an aperture of f4 or f2.8 or whatever, fine, set your aperture. But that means that then you're going to have to use your ISO and perhaps your shutter speed in order to make that picture nice and black. So fast shutter speeds with flashes. Joe McNally mentioned, because I asked him, because people ask me this a lot, but the high-speed sync flash mode, or as it shows up, it's usually FP on the flash itself. So what you want to make sure when you're using your flashes is just that your settings are correct so that you can use high-speed sync, which basically means that you can use any shutter speed you want. You won't get limited by your shutter speed in the camera. If you don't set that up, then your shutter speed is generally going to top out at 250th of a second or less, depending on what setting you've got in your camera. So just to explain, I'm going to find the setting for you now. It's in the custom settings menu. It's under bracketing flash. It's in the D850 at least. It's E1 flash sync speed. And you just want to change that to 1/25th of a second. Won't be able to show you because of the green screen. There we go. 250th of a second, and then auto FP. That's the one you want. That's the high speed sync flash. So that means that you won't be limited as to what shutter speed you can use. That means that you can choose your aperture. Let's say you want a 1.4 aperture. Fantastic. That's a lot of light coming into the lens. So you're going to need to use a very fast shutter speed in order to get you that blacked out photo, so that you know when you go and turn your lights on that the lights are the only thing creating light in your picture. I don't know why it took me a long time to learn this. But after I discovered this, I was like, oh yeah, makes sense. And it's important whether or not you're using speed lights or artificial little LEDs, constant light sources. Obviously, if you're using natural light, you can't just go and turn the sun off. So that's a different thing. But natural light is generally, that's not the only thing sort of illuminating your subject. You're not going for these dramatic kind of black and white or dramatic film noir looking pictures. So just to recap, make sure that your E1 in my case, or it's probably going to be E1 for most cameras, but your flash setting is on auto FP, which is faster than 250th of a second, because that means that the flash just fires regardless of what your shutter speed is. And then you get your flash is the only thing that's going to create that light on your subject, and that's kind of what we're going for today. Have a cookie with the coffee. Yay. I will. Gonna go and make a cake after this. Photographer, yeah, it's elderflower and lime cheesecake, actually. Let's just digress a little bit. Yeah, the elderflower and lime cheesecake with a ginger biscuit base is probably my signature dish. I haven't made one of those in a little while, but I will. And then when social distancing is a thing of the past, everyone can have some. But thank you very much, Paul, for your contribution to the Coffee Fund. That is greatly appreciated. Right. So I digress slightly. So just to recap, front or flat lighting, one of the branches is the butterfly, which gives you that little butterfly effect, or paramount as they call it. So you get that light that's coming behind the photographer and then onto the subject, usually from a kind of high angle, and then you get this little butterfly shape under the nose. Natural lighting with or without fill is obviously what it says on the box. You use a window, you use outdoors. It generally produces quite a nice flat look. If you've got a nice overcast day like today is a perfect day for some flat lighting if you've got an overcast day, because I, for one, know that I can take pictures. Slightly ironically, when I wanted to do the directional light using natural light kind of shots, the weather turned very sour, which is why I don't have any kind of natural light portraits. But Baxter, with his great shot of that natural light, black and white coming in, was perfect for that. And then again, with split lighting, subject is lit from one side usually, and then you've got your various different branches of that. You've got your Rembrandt lighting, where you've got the little triangle of light. You've got your loop lighting, which usually creates a little loop of a shadow. Broad lighting, where the subject is illuminated, the side of the face illuminated is closest to the flash. Short lighting, where the subject's face is illuminated away from the camera, so this side would be illuminated and this side would be in shadow. And then backlighting, which is where the light source is usually coming from behind the photographer, behind the subject, and then the photographer either has a fill light or a reflector or something just to add to that. Brian says, if using auto FP and fast shutter, max flash power is lower than with the slower shutter speeds. Not usually an issue, but might be if you're a long way from the subject. This is very true. Also, bear in mind with your flashes, so something that I encounter quite often when I'm using a flash remotely is that the secondary flash, if I'm using it quite a lot and quite heavily, because it's an SB600, it takes longer to recycle than the SB900, which means that I start to get lower and slower flash output, if you like. So then pictures end up getting darker and darker until I give it time to kind of refresh and recycle. Oh, thank you, Simon. Good. E1. Ta-da! And it can, and Z, yeah, yes, exactly. Once selected, it can be left. So you don't have to change your auto FP setting, that E1 setting. You don't have to change it once you've set it. I don't know why you would want to change it back to anything else. Maybe you would. I'm sure that someone can probably tell me why you would. But I tend to, with all my cameras, just leave it on that and then that's it. Brilliant. Let me know if you have any questions on any of the stuff that I have covered on baking tips. I'm just trying to check I haven't missed any comments while I've been here. The shot of the girl on the couch is called noir photography. Yes, it is risque in nature. The others are not, as there's no ladies in it. Well, noir photography doesn't always have to have ladies in it. But yes, risque photography probably does always have to have ladies in it. So now just on the photo noir thing, because I did want to cover that kind of extensively, and Simon sent me all of the examples you've seen. We were kind of going for a black and white photo noir effect, and then I didn't have quite the right setup to actually recreate a lot of those myself, which was slightly unfortunate. But generally, the kind of film noir effect usually means that you've got quite, not always, but you've got quite heavy shadows. It also means that your subject will usually be dressed in a style that resembles those kind of old black and white films. Hence it's called like film noir, because it's usually shot in the same style as those black and white films. I'm now going to find and show you those pictures if I can in some semblance of order. Let's see if I can do that and multitask at the same time. Probably not, but we can try. So with these kind of shots, you usually have props. You usually have it set up in such a way that you can really control the point of light that's coming in. I saw a fantastic tutorial actually on the Nikon School website, I think it was, where they use things like what are the name of those blinds, those shutter blinds, that's probably what they're called, which create those lines of light. So then you have the light source coming through those blinds and casting straight onto the subject and creating these very dark shadows. That was very, very clever. Rainy days are perfect for stuff like that as well, because the light is fairly muted outside, and then you're just getting whatever the light source that you want to use to illuminate the portion of the subject is pretty much entirely controlling the light in the picture. I'm going to try and find all these pictures in one place. I was very busy organizing them all, so now I have to switch over to a slightly different view. One moment, please. Oh, I've got them all open. That's why it won't do it. Okay, well, I'm going to show you systematically then. So things that could be considered kind of photo noir. In fact, I would call this a film noir photo. This is Baxter's picture. I would totally classify that as a film noir picture. It's got the props, it's got the black and white, it's got the harsh shadow and the sort of single point of illumination there. She's wearing a hat, although I can't really see what kind of hat it is, but she's totally wearing a hat. This is one of Simon's. Again, the props are very important, and the single light source. Do I have another one? I mean, no, I don't on that one. This one is another, this is the backlighting one, but again, this could be considered a kind of film noir mock-up with that single light source. Thing with film noir is it's quite easy to recreate with a single light source. You don't have to have lots of lighting going on for it. If you want to shoot like this, and if you do want to create shots like this, I would recommend generally shooting in color and then converting to black and white so that you've got a bit more control. You can also then shoot in RAW if you're shooting in color and then converting to black and white afterwards. If you don't want to and you want to shoot straight in camera black and white, then you'll just be left with a JPEG file. Obviously, you can set the camera to RAW, but unless you're going to use Nikon's own software, I've talked about this a lot, but if you're going to use Nikon's own software to process your RAW files, it will keep the black and white profile. If you use something else like Lightroom or Photoshop or Affinity, it won't keep that black and white profile. It will just revert back to a color RAW file. So it's entirely up to you how you want to do it. But these kind of shots are very, very low maintenance. You've got a single light source and you can get very creative. Now, does everyone remember my trusted 5-way reflector, this thing? Remember that? It has, on the case, I have to reach down, sorry. I'm going to just go out of shot here. But it actually has a flag, which means a portion of it which will prevent or block light. So you can use black material or anything like that just to flag the light if you want to create these film noir-esque kind of photos. This is going to be very, very useful, particularly if you've got quite a harsh light source. Obviously diffusers, umbrellas, all that stuff is great, but it's not necessary. You don't need that to create these kind of photos. Baxter says noir is best done with hard light, snoot or grid. Works with color or black and white. Yeah, I didn't actually, I have Venetian. Thank you. Yeah, definitely need that coffee now. Noir is best done with hard light, snoot or grid. Works with color or black and white. Yeah, I haven't done color noir photos, but I was thinking with black and white, but that does make a lot of sense. Lighting technique is referred to as black box. There you go. It had a name where you set the camera to give you a black image before adding light. It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Black box. It just means that you get your first image, you know that no other light is coming into that shot, and then your flash or your constant light source whatever you're using, your LED light source, your rotolight, whatever it is the only thing creating the light in the picture. Anyway, there we go. Okay, Baxter knows more than I do on the subject of film noir photography anyway. And so I would encourage you all to have a look at the dry folder. There were actually way more photos in there, but those were the ones that I just picked out because I wanted to give you examples of all of these different lighting techniques. Now, your homework. Steve Neal said I should have different folders for all of the different streams so that you guys can upload your kind of after pictures after we've done the stream. I'm more than happy to do that, particularly for things like today's stream where because I don't normally talk about portraiture that much. I tend to talk about other bits and pieces, but so many of you are so talented. I mean, it really astonishes me how much talent there is in this little group that we have here. So it would be really nice to see all of your shots afterwards. I will do that. I will create a folder for portrait lighting techniques. I'll find an appropriate name for it, and then you can pop in any photos that you want to there to show how you've recreated some of these effects, and then also let me know if you have any questions on them. Simon says, I used a honeycomb grid on the fill light in a couple of the images Becky has shown today. There you go. Clever. I don't have one, so I couldn't do that. But that is very clever. Yes, I saw those in the diagram, in fact. Yeah, so what I think would be quite nice is once you feel inspired, once you've watched the stream and you suddenly think, I think I'm going to give this a go, then I will create a drive folder so that you can upload your pictures in there. Do put your names on them, because some people don't. You can also include any settings that you use, just so that I can see. And then we can do a little showcase next week, perhaps. So I will do that. That is everything. Believe it or not, that is 7 types of lighting that I've talked about today. Butterfly, natural or flat, Rembrandt, loop, broad, short, and backlighting. Amazing how time flies. If you have any questions on any of this stuff, you can use the comments for a few more moments to plop in your questions, and between myself and Simon we will answer them. Otherwise, as I say, you can always email me. It's no problem. Ed, you have to upload to the drive folder. You just have to. It's not hard. I mean, obviously, there's a certain amount of trust involved because it's going into our drive folders in the Grays of Westminster drive folder, and we will then promote your pictures for you either in the live stream or by using them for the covers or the newsletters. If you're happy to do that, then great. If you're not happy to do that, then don't. It's not a problem. I'm glad you've learnt a lot, Terry. Yeah. See, I was going to do self-portraits and then I chickened out. So hence I did my husband and my kids. But yeah, finding people to do pictures of during lockdown is quite difficult. Get a remote release, David, and then do some self-portraits. Get dressed up, put on the fedora and the waistcoat and do some black and white film noir pictures. I don't think you have to have an account, Ed. I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I know it's a Google Drive thing. Most people have a Google account, but if you don't, I think you can still upload your pictures. I said live stream is changing. Oh, sorry. Thank you, David, for your contribution to the coffee fund. I just spotted that. Live stream is changing. So, Gordon, we are going to be reopening from the 15th, which means that I will obviously be back taking on my role as head of technical and general manager, which is actually my job. So that does mean that I won't be able to stream quite as frequently with all the running of the shop and everything else that goes on. However, I am going to do a stream at least once a week. We are going to send out a survey. I haven't worked out quite how it's going to work yet, but I do want to know what day would work for you all so that I can kind of incorporate your schedules with it as well as my own slightly mad schedule. And then hopefully, not next week. Next week I will try and do 2 and I will keep you posted. The best way to know whether or not I'm doing a stream is to be subscribed and notified, but I will try and give you plenty of advance notice for if anything changes. But certainly for the week after, so that's the week 15th of June, things are going to start reverting slowly back to normal, with regulations kind of easing up a little bit. We are obviously going to have to be very clever about how we have people in the shop because it's quite a little space, but it just means that I will be doing that stuff. I'm just having a look. Wife hates having her picture taken. I know. I hate having my picture taken too. Use a teddy bear. I understand you prefer the streams to video. Yeah, it's interesting. They're two very different formats. The streams are kind of in the moment, including all of my confusion and the occasional faux pas that happen, whereas videos obviously are a little bit more controlled and they're usually shorter. I enjoy both. With the videos, we tend to be a little bit more flexible just because we can actually do different shots and give you different angles and stuff like that. But we're going to try and do both so that you've got lots and lots of material, educational and otherwise, to just fill your screens with. Okay, I think that covers everything today, and we're nearly out of time. So thank you everybody for joining me. It is Thursday. Yes, so I will see you next Tuesday one way or another for a stream of some description, probably from the shop based on my slight change of schedule. And duly noted, I'm going to add that as a survey question. Do you prefer streams or videos? Yeah, I will send out a survey. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, please do subscribe, because it will probably go through the newsletter that I send out once or twice a week as soon as I've got that together. So anyway, I look forward to hearing from all of you once I've got the survey together. And you are very welcome, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to be here with you of an afternoon. I will see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend. And if you need anything, as I say, drop me an email or leave me a comment on the stream. All right, take care.